I'll confess, I will. I fully expected, as it came to evaluating quarterbacks for this year's draft class, that Jayden Daniels was going to be my QB1 or my QB2, especially as I would catch LSU games here and there throughout the year. And I said, wow, this guy stands out. Not as much as like an Anthony Richardson did last year, right? But I thought he really popped during the games. And I said, I'll be really interested to see what I think about him when I'm paying less attention to the results and more attention to the process. And I think sometimes when it comes to evaluating quarterbacks, whether it's the professionals, whether it's the amateurs like myself, and the ones in between, the draft Twitter, the draft media folks, it can be very easy to get caught up in the results and not pay nearly enough attention to the process. Yeah, so at the end of the day, the results matter, but how do you go about those results? How do they come, and how much do you contribute directly to them, and how much do you experience or achieve those results in spite of certain things, right? I think it's fundamentally an important question that you have to solve for when it comes to the quarterback position. Because too often you see people say, well, this guy's been talked about highly by the media for a year or two, so they must really, really translate well as a prospect to the NFL level. And many times they don't. I say all of that to say, anybody I see out there right now, coming from a standpoint where I initially thought that I was going to be huge on Jayden Daniels, that would feel comfortable about taking this guy in the top 5, let alone potentially as early as number 2 overall to the Commanders. And those that might be thinking he's QB1 or QB2 in this draft, I got to ask the question, what the hell are you smoking? I would love nothing more to be wrong about this young man and his future at the NFL level. But I'm sorry, there is a big departure between what I'm seeing a lot of other people say about him and what I actually see in him in his game. Now, I get it in terms of the strengths. He's got prototype height, good enough hand size for the position. So when you talk about size, often it's just about height and weight, but hand size matters too, right? When you're talking about a quarterback and the ability to grip the ball, especially in some adverse conditions, he's 6'4", legit, right? And his hand size is decent. We'll talk about the frame and the bulk and the muscle mass in a moment, but he's got something to work with there. And even the piece that he doesn't from a physical standpoint, he could easily work on by getting into an NFL strength training program and or most importantly, making a couple babies. That always will add some weight, man weight to you no matter what. The first thing that really pops out on film about Jayden Daniels, though, he's a high-end runner with the football. He is a home run threat in that area. I think he's a little more straight line than somebody like a Lamar or a Justin Fields. So I don't quite put him on that tier. But coming to the NFL, he certainly would be in the tier 2, on the highest of ends probably of tier 2 in terms of athletes with the ball in his hands. Athlete at the quarterback position, which, in the modern NFL, it's nice to have guys that can make some damage happen with their feet. You don't want them to be too overly reliant upon it, which again, we'll talk about in terms of concerns. Jayden Daniels, at least as I watched him here in 2023, and he better because he got a shit ton of starting experience, demonstrated the ability to scan the field pretty effortlessly and go through his progressions. Now what he did with that, again, is a different story. And you'll notice a lot of these strengths I'm calling out here have some type of caveats and some, in some cases, sizable or significant caveats. He showed the ability, one thing I did like, and this might have been his best trait of all, and again, I think that comes with the fact that even a starting quarterback for 5 fucking years, he better be able to do it. He showed the ability to recognize the defense pre-snap and make the adjustments. That's something you don't always get out of a college kid coming to the NFL level. It's often something you'll think about as in the weaknesses or the concerns category. Can they do it? They don't do it. They're unable to do it. He can. So when you talk about like Caleb Williams and his mental aptitude for the game, Jayden Daniels certainly has that too. He's willing and able to throw the ball deep, so he's not just dinking and dunking. He's looking to make big plays down the field. He's got quick feet, so it's one thing to be a straight line athlete, which like I said, he kind of is to some degree, but he definitely has quick feet to be able to bail out of the pocket effectively, avoid some trouble, which you got to be able to extend plays at the NFL level. His footwork in the pocket, his arm mechanics in general, solid. Like, I was expecting it would be a little rougher than they were. It was pretty solid, pretty smooth there. I also saw a guy that plays with the physical and mental courage you want from a face of the franchise. And sometimes you watch a quarterback and you're like, ooh, they got some chicken liver in them or some chicken little in them. And I didn't get that sense from him. And if you're a believer in the old Bill Parcells rule of 30 plus career college starts, he's got 55 of them. So he's got a shit ton of experience. So in terms of drafting a guy high and saying, we want him to be as prepared as possible to play at the next level from day one, Jayden Daniels is that because of his 5 years of starting experience between Arizona State and LSU. He's got all of that. But man, oh man, the concerns to me are big and plenty. I talked about the fact before, size-wise, he's a little thin. He needs to add about 10 to 15 pounds of muscle or man weight, right? You know, hit the strength program, make a baby. That could combine, and you can get a full 225, 230 pounds on that frame and not lose a lot there. But he does need to add it. Because what really concerns you with him as a runner is that thin frame combined with his propensity to take some big hits. He's got to learn how to avoid some of those hits. And in addition, he takes some big hits in the pocket too. So it's fair to question, while he didn't have much in the way of durability issues this past season at LSU, would he have some durability issues of being able to hold up for 17 games at the NFL level, similar to a Lamar Jackson? Here's the thing, though, that really surprised me. His arm is not great. It's average. It really is. He lacks great arm strength to be able to drive the ball to the boundary outside of the hash marks and being able to throw it consistently on a rope to the intermediate and deep levels. That arm talent was not what I expected. And the closer I watched it, the more I came away saying, ooh, I've got some real concerns here. I don't care what anybody says. You compare his arm talent to, let's say, a Caleb Williams, a Drake May, it's not in the same class. It just isn't. He's much closer to a Bo Nix or a J.J. McCarthy than maybe many want to perceive, because they're thinking like 6'4", great athlete. He's also got to have this howitzer for a right arm, and he doesn't, right? He just doesn't. And it consistently shows up on film that he doesn't. And what also shows up is that whole piece I called out about him being able to scan the defense. Like, that's great and that's wonderful, but what do you do with it? And to me, he really struggled at times to process and quickly react to what he sees. In particular, what concerned me is once he got off that first read, which he could be a little late to, his accuracy going to the second and third read sucked. Especially when you compare it to like Williams and Drake May. Not good. Lack of high-end arm talent, some real accuracy concerns coming off of the first read. Starts to be some major red flags here. And you additionally see some challenges with accuracy and ball placement in terms of back shoulder throws and fades. Those are often off the mark. And that's before you even get to the other piece in terms of him as a pocket passer and his propensity for bailing out of clean pockets at a high rate, like a really high and frankly concerning rate in terms of, does he see ghosts there when he's in the pocket? Like, why the fuck? Did his lineman not shower? Does the pocket smell like ass and he's trying to bail out for his own freedom? I don't know. But he bails out of way too many clean pockets. And then when he faces pressure, his sack rate is really, really high. You combine all that when I talked about hey, he scans the field. That's great. And you see this consistently. Like, he does go through the field. But then it's like, what the fuck do you do with that, right? And we saw this with Justin Fields at the NFL level is, even when he got off of his first read, what do you do from there? His accuracy drops. He just doesn't process and react to what he sees. When somebody says, well, he could process because you see the field. Well, I can look at shit all day long. That doesn't mean I'm processing anything. That's not processing. Processing is, hey, look, this guy's about to be open. I'm going to throw it before he actually is open. You know, throwing with the anticipation. And to me, consistently, Jayden Daniels did not show that ability to throw with anticipation. So as I look at him overall, I can see initially where somebody might get fooled and see, this is a young man that's got it all, except he doesn't. Yes, he can do spectacular things running the ball, but how much does that matter? How much does it really matter? And frankly, I think the comparisons to Lamar Jackson are really lazy. And they're forgetting who Lamar Jackson was as a prospect coming out of Louisville. You know, unless you were only paying attention to Bill Polian, who thought he should play wide receiver, you're missing some key things. Lamar was more dynamic as a runner. He was more consistent as a passer, attacking the middle of the field and deep. He was more consistent with his desire to want to do so and in terms of his effectiveness with doing so. And he was also better moving off of his primary read and throwing to his second and tertiary reads. Like Jayden Daniels is not in that class as a prospect. And I say that as somebody that had a decently high grade on Lamar in 2018. He was my QB2 behind Josh Allen, if you remember. Like, I was expecting, as many people were making the comparison and talking about Jayden Daniels in the same light as Lamar Jackson, I was expecting to come away thinking, okay, it's a bit of Lamar 2.0. I ain't see that shit, though. I see a guy that's bailing out of clean pockets at a high rate, high sack rate under pressure. Like, what do you do when the chips are on the line? It's really concerning. How much damage can he actually do when he's bailing out of clean pockets all the time? Combined with that lack of big-time arm talent, it's just not there. And yeah, you could sit there and say you could grow and develop that, and some guys do to some degree, right? And maybe he could. But there are different things when you talk about flaws and things you can live with as a passer. There are some things you can coach up and other things you have to mask or avoid. And if you're drafting somebody, like I'll use the Caleb Williams example, his arm talent's better. Sometimes playing within structure, that's a coach him up thing, right? The fumbling, that's a coaching up thing. You can live with some of that stuff. It's a lot harder to live with some of these other things like breaking down the integrity of the pocket because you're too quick to bail out and then you're not doing a great job of improvising after that. It's those types of things, like not being able to get off your first read and be able to actually process and react to what you see. Those are things that aren't so easily coached up. And when you get to a place where you have to mask too many things versus just coach them up, you really start to need to take a moment and take a step back and say, wow, I got to pause. And I got to be careful here. And how much I'm really bought into this guy being the dude. And additionally, when you think about Jayden Daniels, how much was he propped up by throwing to studs like Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr.? Pretty easy to look good when you got studs like that, and you're going to say, well, similar conversation with Joe Burrow when he was at LSU. Yeah, and Joe Burrow had a noodle arm. I'll grant you that. But Joe Burrow was fantastic in terms of pocket presence, his accuracy, his instincts, his ability to extend plays while also being able to execute within structure. Like, they're not even in the same class as a prospect, in my opinion. And how much real upside can you expect from a guy that turns 24 in December and took 5 years really in college to be great and then lacks that great big-time physical upside as a passer? I've seen a lot of comparisons for Jayden Daniels to Justin Fields, and I get some of that, but the name that kept popping up and the image I kept getting was Marcus Mariota. When you go back to Mariota at Oregon, a lot of the same traits here. Like, he could be accurate to his first read, but once he got outside of that first read, he really struggled. He struggled at times to really process what he saw and react to it quickly. He bailed out of clean pockets at an alarmingly high rate. He took too many sacks. The arm talent in general was okay, but it wasn't special. So he doesn't have that compensatory ability to say, well, I made a mistake here, but I've got a gun and I can just fire that joker in. He didn't have that, right? Like, Mariota was a pretty good athlete, but certainly not on like Lamar or even Justin Fields level. So I get the Justin Fields comparisons, but I really think the most appropriate comparison and the one that when you go back and you think about Mariota, not at the NFL level, but it's important when you think about projection, what a guy could be. But when you go back to Mariota at Oregon, and then a decade later you turn around and you watch Jayden Daniels, you see an incredibly similar quarterback. And while no two people are ever the same, if I'm comparing potentially a guy that your team is going to take very high in the draft to Marcus Mariota, you know there might be some issues here. I've got a second, like mid to late second round grade on Jayden Daniels. He's a guy that could come in with some good coaching that masks his deficiencies for now and accentuates his positives. And he could have something initially, and he has a chance to outplay my projection. But right now, I'd have some real concerns about just how much of a chance he has to be a star quarterback at the NFL level. This feels like a guy that's going to leave you disappointed and give you a flash every once in a while, but always leave you wanting more, like a Fields or Mariota.